Hello and welcome to Newsclick. We have with us today Mr. Gautam Navlakha, writer and civil liberties activist, and we're going to be discussing with him the latest developments in Jammu and Kashmir vis-a-vis the PDP-BJP alliance. Gautam, welcome to Newsclick.
Thank you.
First of all, the very alliance, two parties like the BJP and PDP coming together to form a government in Jammu and Kashmir, especially when they've had sort of diametrically opposed views on issues like AFSPA, Article 370. On what basis do you think these parties really came together? Was it just an opportunistic alliance in that sense?
Very often in electoral alliances do tend to be opportunistic alliances given the configuration in the assembly and the number of seats that each party has. So there are some compelling reasons for it. But in the case of Jammu and Kashmir, there are some other factors that have to be kept in mind. The dependence of Jammu and Kashmir state on the central government for finance, in the name of internal security, the Central Ministry of Home Affairs and Ministry of Defence that controls much of the law and order, matters, etc., etc. Makes it a very different context altogether. So even if PDP had been inclined for some reason not to form an alliance with BJP, they knew that they were in real life, they faced a problem. A hostile centre wouldn't have helped them any. And in the past also we have seen such alliances. So the question about the ideological, that they occupy different poles ideologically, obviously doesn't come in the way of forming alliances where government formation is concerned and whatever other plans that they have in their that they want to carry out. That is one reason. But there is another reason also that must be kept in mind. While there are differences between BDP and BJP on a number of issues, as you mentioned, Article 370, AFSPA, the West Pakistan, the question of West Pakistan refugees, the question of release of political prisoners, etc., etc. These obviously are not that significant. See, Article 370, we must except that Article 370 is not the same Article 370 of 1949 vintage. It's been much eroded, and in fact, as the Congress government in the Parliament, Gulzari Lal Nanda, as the Home Minister, Union Home Minister in the 60s, told the Parliament that इसे तो हम घिस के खत्म कर देंगे. So I mean the policy of the Indian state has been to erode Article 370. From that point of view, what remains of Article 370 is not much. It's primarily the state subjecthood. Nothing much beyond that, because the center's encroachment in what was pledged to be an autonomous where internal sovereignty would rest with the Jammu and Kashmir has been much eroded over the years, and centre's powers have extended much beyond that.
But where do you see this heading now, especially with Masarat Alam's release? I mean, though it's being actually reported now that this was one of the key demands of the PDP when they were forming the government, that the BJP was aware of it. But now with his release and the RSS stepping in as well and expressing displeasure about what has happened, where do you see this alliance headed? I mean,
there are a couple of things I'd like to add here. Masarat's release was brought about primarily because the government of India and the state of Jammu and Kashmir and the police and agencies exhausted all the legal measures that they could take against Masarat Alam.
Absolutely.
They had not much evidence. And now it is established that actually the fact that he got bail in all the 26 cases that were filed against him, that in 2 cases he has been acquitted where the trial has taken place, that in the Preventive Detention Act has been quashed time and again by the High Court, and the Supreme Court is very categorical in its I think 23rd March 2013 order, which very categorically laid down that you cannot use old charges to rearrest, to detain a person under PSA, and secondly that you have to give Masarat Alam a week's notice so that he can explore legal remedies against it. Made it absolutely difficult there was no legal standing. It wasn't brought about so much by Mr. Mufti Muhammad Sayyed as he tried to claim credit for it, and which later developments actually exposed him that he was unnecessarily taking credit for something that he had nothing to do with. Insofar as Mufti Muhammad Saeed and PDP's commitment to release of political prisoners, to this whole idea about healing touch and battle of ideas, very important and very good. I mean, a battle of ideas is a very welcome thing, but the tragedy is that it's one thing they say and another thing they do, and that's precisely what is also happening. Because if you look at other developments in Kashmir, it's very clear that they are neither going to release other political prisoners against whom there are no charges, despite their promise and assurance and public pledges, but that even in cases where the state government has power, and where its sanction is all that is required to prosecute those who have perpetrated heinous crimes, civilians, like the people who are responsible for killings in 2010. I mean, Masarat Alam is being accused. Umar Abdullah accuses Masarat Alam for inciting people to do it. It's such a mockery of reality on the ground. Absolutely. Where it's actually the people who came out, and that he was part of the leadership and things like that doesn't take away from the fact that it was a popular uprising that had taken place, and 120 people who have been killed, including children. Not a single J&K police officer or CRPF personnel has been prosecuted for a crime. I mean, and even the most heinous crimes, I mean, brutal killings of children at the hands of it. To ignore and brush aside all that, to ignore what had happened in Machil. I mean, Machil is a classic example when Narendra Modi goes and takes credit for the army court-martial, sentencing to senior officers and other personnel of the armed forces. And lo and behold, what happens after just a couple of weeks, the Northern Command stays that general court-martial order, saying that there are other things that have to be looked into. So it just shows, I mean, there is not much seriousness with which any of the governments have approached the issue of justice for those who have suffered at the hands of Indian armed forces. And it is a very serious issue. And it's not just restricted to the question of Armed Forces Special Powers Act. We have to also understand that impunity and legal immunity that the forces enjoy in large parts of the country which are being declared disturbed. Legal immunity doesn't just flow from Armed Forces Special Powers Act, but also from the charters of each individual force. So for instance, the Army Act, section 125 and 126 of the which allows the army, it gives the powers to the army to decide whether they'll send any complaint that is leveled against the personnel to a criminal court or try it themselves in the court-martial or general security force court-martial for BSF, CRPF, etc., etc. This too gives them enormous power and immunity. The fact that the Indian judiciary, unfortunately, has also upheld this legal immunity by saying that one has to always accept that the forces or the personnel work in good faith, and this presumption of good faith cannot be dislodged without prima facie evidence. But in a Kafkaesque situation, they say a magistrate cannot take cognition of prima facie evidence without sanction of the government, be it the state government or the central government, whichever be the issue. The point I am trying to make is that these are serious issues. Now, we may like to believe that election turnouts and all show that people are willing to forget and get on with their lives. That's not true.
Now, when you're saying that, say for example, Mufti Muhammad Saeed actually wasn't really responsible for the release of Masarat Alam, and there was really no case against him finally, or a strong enough case against him to keep him behind bars for long. Also, and one doesn't, like you were saying, that one doesn't know whether Mufti Muhammad Saeed himself or his PDP are actually genuinely committed to the release of political prisoners and a whole range of other issues that they had in their manifesto, and plus the dependence of Kashmir on the centre, because of which then they need in this case the BJP. Do you then see them going down the National Conference road as well and becoming another mess all over again, or where do you?
There's a strong possibility, because there are so many contradictions in Jammu and Kashmir, and there are so many fault lines that have been ignored or we are not taking we're not acknowledging, which can blow up. RS is one factor. I mean, there are two standards by which we judge organizations and political movements. There is one standard by which we judge right-wing extremist Hindutva forces, which are allowed a free play everywhere. In fact, in a disturbed area, Bajrang Dal was even allowed to provide arms training for its coach, which is extremely disturbing development. Now, if you do that, on the other hand, you follow an entirely different line of approach of suppression vis-a-vis those who are talking about Azadi, or they are talking about right of self-determination, even if we do not like. The point is, in a battle of ideas, all sides should be allowed free space. Absolutely. And conditions should be created where this free space actually can expand rather than get constricted. So, but the point I am trying to make is that we have had double standards. Mr. Praveen Togadia was allowed to return and revisit Jammu and Kashmir after he was stopped by the previous government. At the same time as the legal department was saying that Masarat Alam has to be released because we have no legal standing, that there is no legal basis left with us to detain him any further. It shows that this was an attempt to balance. They knew that RSS is going to go all, jump the gun, and lo and behold, they did. And so did many other parties like National Conference and the Congress, which went out of the way to try and use it. They saw it as a weak point of the Narendra Modi government to take it up. But in the bargain, unfortunately, they forgot that there are very serious political implications also that follow from everything that is happening in Jammu and Kashmir, and how it resonates in rest of the country also matters.
Especially now with, whatever be the legal standing of Masarat's case, but the fact that it's always sort of whipped up as an emotional issue by the RSS outside Kashmir, and cases like these. Finally, Gautam, what we've seen also in this election result, in the last assembly election result in J&K, and what is being read by many is a sort of a complete polarization, with Jammu voting entirely for the BJP and Kashmir voting out the BJP completely, and sort of, though the PDP has grown, but even the NC has retained some pockets of influence. How do you read this, and do you see this polarization then, with this kind of emotional issues being whipped up by the RSS and others? Do you see this polarization also growing then?
Let's be clear that this polarization has existed since 1947, when the old ruling class, which comprised the Hindu Dogras, the Punjabis and the Kashmiri Pandits, where it concerns the Jagirdaris or the administration was concerned. It's been on this conflict which has taken the shape of communalization, because underlying this is also a disgruntlement or disempowerment of an old ruling class. So it's not just a question of communal, that they used the communal card to strike at National Conference in 1947 when they were introducing the land reforms. The first radical land reforms that took place in South Asia itself shows that there were other factors than the communal factors, that it took this color should not blind us to other realities which were working in the ground. That is one point I like to make. So therefore, it's nothing, what is happening today is nothing very surprising. Right from the Praja Parishad day, it is the old ruling classes which were spearheading the campaign against democratization of Jammu and Kashmir after the Hindu Dogra rule ended in 1947. The third point I like to make is that, yes, the likelihood of this drift is something that poses a real, it's a real likelihood of this development going further is absolutely real, and it should not be underestimated. But at the same time, if you look at the election results, there are some other nuances which are also very striking. For instance, despite the so-called Narendra Modi wave, BJP won 25 seats in Jammu, but NC won 2 Hindu-dominated seats despite the so-called Narendra Modi wave. Secondly, in many other parts of Jammu, the Congress, the PDP, one fair number of seats. So even Jammu, you see, if you're talking about polarization between Jammu and Kashmir, there is another polarization that one must be also mindful of. The polarization in Jammu between what is called the Chenab Valley and the other districts which are predominantly Hindu. So it becomes a much more complex situation than it appears to be. A lot depends also on what the Indian democratic minded people and the intelligentsia does. If we fall prey to jingoism and chauvinism, through which we have always looked at Jammu and Kashmir, and we carry on along the same path and believe that India has triumphed and the movement has been suppressed, or that it's all but over, as many people would like to believe, that would be tragedy, because we would be perpetuating and actually furthering this divide.
Thank you so much, Gautam, and we'll obviously have you again to discuss the issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nakul.